I heard the splash first, that unmistakable plop of something heavy crashing into the water. At first, I thought a raccoon had knocked over the bait bucket again. But when I walked out to my dock, fishing pole in hand, the sight that greeted me made my jaw hang open like a barn door in a windstorm. There it was, standing smugly in the golden morning light. A brand new wrought iron gate bolted straight through the middle of my lake access like some medieval fortress. A shiny silver plaque glared at me, polished to an obnoxious gleam, and read, "Private HOA access only. Violators will be prosecuted." My dock, my lake, my peace, all barricaded behind black steel bars. And the cherry on this ridiculous Sunday? A blinking red security camera pointing right at me, its lens twitching like a robotic middle finger. I blinked once, twice, thought maybe I was still dreaming, but nope. The smell of fresh pine and the gentle lapping of Willow Creek Lake were real as ever. Only now they were dressed up with surveillance and fencing, like nature had gotten a bureaucratic makeover. I followed the fence line with my eyes. The black bars slithered along the shore, cutting straight through the reeds past my dock, and snaked all the way to the neighbor's property. It even curved back toward the gravel access road like a dystopian train track. Someone had planned this. Someone had funded this. And someone, I was quickly realizing, had a serious god complex with a clipboard fetish. Living by the lake had always been my dream. After 27 years designing highway drainage systems, I finally cashed out and bought a modest A-frame cabin tucked into the pine-shrouded bend of Willow Creek Lake. No mortgage, no loans, just a patch of peace I paid for in full. Every morning, I'd wake up barefoot, thermos in hand, and wander down to the dock to fish in the mist. It was the kind of quiet you earned, not bought. Or at least, that's what I believed until that morning. Instead of casting my line, I found myself nose to iron with a gate I didn't authorize and a camera that blinked like it knew it wasn't welcome. By noon, my confusion had hardened into fury. I hadn't received a single notice, no warnings, no community meetings, not even a passive-aggressive flyer. Whoever did this had done it quietly, and that kind of silence only came from someone who thought they'd get away with it. I didn't have to wait long to meet the villain of the piece. That afternoon, as I sat on my porch drinking cold coffee and muttering to myself, she strutted up my gravel path with the self-importance of a pageant judge and the wardrobe to match. Lavender blouse, wedge sandals way too fancy for gravel, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it held the secrets of the universe. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and yes, she was exactly what you're picturing. She gave me a smile tighter than a rubber band on a turkey leg and gestured toward the gate like she was unveiling a brand new car. "Hello there. We've installed a protective barrier around the lake access," she announced, her voice syrupy sweet and full of corporate smug. "Strictly for residents within the association, of course. Liability concerns and all that." I stared at her. "I live right there. That's my dock. That's my lake access." She tilted her head and laughed as if I'd just confused a chicken for a goose. "Well, technically, the access strip sits on a parcel now maintained by the Willow Creek Shores Homeowners Association. You must have missed the notices. We sent several." She tapped her clipboard like it was gospel. I could feel my blood pressure drumming behind my eyes. "I didn't get a single notice," I said, trying not to let my voice rise. "And how in the blue hell did you get permission to fence in my lake access?" "Oh, but it is part of the HOA now," she said, all sugary smug. "The HOA acquired the lease last fall. It was previously managed by the bait shop owner. Bless his soul. Since he passed, the land reverted to open bid. We secured it and designated it as common HOA property." I stared at her like she'd grown antlers. "The bait shop?" Of course. There had always been a narrow strip of land between my property line and the water, a forgotten remnant of a rickety shack that used to sell minnows and soda to fishermen. I'd always assumed it was part of the county easement or included in my deed. Turns out, it wasn't, and this woman had slithered in and leased it like a hawk stealing a rabbit out of a farmer's field. "Let me guess," I said slowly, my voice dry. "You didn't tell anyone who lived nearby that the land was up for grabs?" "It was discussed in our October meeting," she chirped, fully above board. "You're welcome to submit a formal appeal. Though, as a non-member, I'm afraid you won't have voting rights." I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of lake water over my head. I wasn't even part of this HOA. I bought my property before the subdivision ever showed up with its rules and pastel-colored lawns. But somehow, This woman had managed to wrap red tape around my dock and declare it off limits without so much as a knock on my door. The next day, I came back with bolt cutters. I figured if they wanted to play dirty, I'd play dumber. I got one satisfying snap into a steel link before Eleanor arrived like clockwork, this time with a rent-a-cop security guard and a sheriff on speed dial. To his credit, the deputy looked just as confused as I was. But after digging through the property records, he confirmed it. I owned the land around my house, but the strip with the dock, just wide enough for a gate, was technically under HOA lease. Eleanor watched the whole thing unfold like she was sipping a martini at the opera. By the end of the week, a sign went up, "Do not trespass. $10,000 fine." That ridiculous red camera kept blinking like it knew I was going to snap one day. I tried appealing to the HOA board. I sat through a meeting that felt like a community theater performance starring suburban villains and middle managers with power complexes. One guy even said, "You're not on the lake list anymore." I wanted to laugh. What in the name of fresh-caught trout was a lake list? The final insult. Eleanor had the only key to the lock. For a few days, I sulked. I considered hiring a lawyer, starting a GoFundMe, or tunneling under the fence like some cartoon prisoner. I even looked into building a floating dock and launching a kayak invasion just to make a point. But then, one night, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees, I saw something that changed everything. A small, crooked for sale sign, discreetly tucked in the reeds on the other side of the gate. That's when I started to grin. Eleanor had no idea what she'd just done, and she definitely didn't know who she'd just messed with. The sign was small, almost apologetically so, like it didn't want to draw too much attention. It stood crooked in the reeds, half swallowed by tall grass and thyme, with one corner of the board warped from rain. If I hadn't been standing at just the right angle on my porch, sipping coffee and glaring at the gate like it owed me money, I probably would have missed it altogether. But there it was, white letters on weather-faded red. For sale. Call for info. I squinted, stepped off my porch, and strolled down to get a better look. That sign wasn't on the dock parcel. It was next to it, on a skinny sliver of land that looked like a forgotten appendix to the main property. I followed the line of the fence with my eyes. It didn't just sit on the HOA's leased parcel. It actually curved across onto this one, anchoring its steel posts deep into the ground on this narrow stretch of earth. It was such a strange detail, I almost laughed. In their frenzy to wall me out, the HOA had apparently assumed the gate and fence were planted entirely on the land they leased. But this little chunk, just wide enough to matter, was separate, detached, and apparently for sale. I pulled out my phone, fingers already dialing before my brain had finished connecting the dots. A real estate agent named Diana answered after the second ring. She sounded tired, probably thinking I was just another tire kicker. But when I told her which parcel I was looking at, her tone changed. "Oh, that one," she said, like I'd just asked about a haunted house or a cursed diamond. "Honestly, you're the first person who's called about it in years." I raised an eyebrow. "Years?" "Yep," she said. "It was inherited by a woman in Alaska. Her late husband owned it forever ago. She's not even been down to see it. Said she forgot she had it until the tax bill came." I asked how much. She named a number so low I nearly dropped my phone. That night, I sat on the porch with a grin creeping across my face. The stars hung low over Willow Creek Lake, and the water shimmered like it knew what was coming. The gate, proud and ridiculous in the moonlight, stood as a monument to Eleanor's ego. But now I had something she didn't, a plan. If she wanted control so badly, she was about to get it, just not the kind she expected. I was going to buy the land with the fence, the land with the gate, the land that Eleanor, in her desperate little power grab, had accidentally used without owning. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized, deed in hand. I became the proud owner of one narrow, wildly underappreciated strip of dirt, and with it, the leverage of a lifetime. The irony was delicious. Eleanor had leased the adjacent parcel under the impression it encompassed the entire access point. But the sliver she missed, the one with the actual gate post cemented into it, wasn't included. It had remained its own separate lot, overlooked by everyone until I stumbled across that fading sign. I bought it for less than a new fishing kayak, and suddenly, I didn't just have lake access. I had control of the lock. I waited a week before making any moves. I wanted the gate to settle in as a fixture in the minds of the HOA. Let Eleanor strut around with her clipboard. Let her feel powerful. Let her believe she had claimed her little lakeside empire. The annual HOA summer brunch was approaching, and rumor had it they planned to host it right there, on the dock I once fished from, now claimed as their exclusive community retreat. Folding chairs began appearing. A white tent was pitched. Someone wheeled in a chocolate fountain that looked like it cost more than my truck. From my deck, I watched it all unfold with a bucket of popcorn and a pair of binoculars. The morning of the event, I made my move. I walked calmly down the path toward the gate, past the HOA members only sign, past the blinking red camera that now watched me from the wrong side of history. In my pocket, I carried a fresh, heavy-duty padlock, the kind used to secure military storage containers. I also brought a small screwdriver, a lockpick kit, and just enough caffeine in my veins to feel like a secret agent. The old lock came off with a soft clink. I snapped the new one in place with a satisfying click, a sound that echoed louder than it should have. Then, I fastened a laminated sign onto the gate, "Private property. Access by owner permission only." I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, the pastel parade began. HOA members in sun hats and salmon-colored polos arrived like clockwork. Eleanor appeared in full regalia, oversized sunglasses, perfectly ironed blouse, clipboard tucked under her arm like a royal decree. She marched toward the gate, greeting people like a general inspecting her troops. Then she reached for the lock. It didn't turn. She frowned, tried again, jiggled it, shook it. Nothing. Her face flushed as she banged the key against the metal as if intimidation would change the shape of a lock. The crowd began to murmur. Someone asked if she needed help. Someone else asked if the brunch was canceled. Eleanor turned to the group with a smile so forced it looked physically painful and announced there had been a small technical issue with the lock, but that it would be resolved soon. That's when I walked up, lemonade in one hand and manila folder in the other. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. I waved. Then I tossed her a copy of the deed. She caught it like it was a live grenade, flipped through the pages, scanning the legalese like it might vanish if she read fast enough. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she managed a single, sputtered sentence. This must be a mistake. You can't just buy community property." I leaned against the fence, casual as a Sunday nap. "You're right. That's why I didn't. I bought my property, the one your gate is standing on, including this nice stretch of land all the way to the big rock over there." She looked down at the map I had so generously highlighted in neon yellow. Her expression morphed from confusion to disbelief to rage in a slow, exquisite spiral. She was standing on land she no longer had authority over. She'd spent HOA funds installing a gate on private property. "But we installed this gate," she said, her voice rising. "And I own the soil under it," I said calmly, "which makes it mine." A beat passed. Then I added, "In fact, I was thinking of replacing it with a hammock." Someone behind her snorted. Olivia, the sharp-eyed board secretary, raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms like she'd just seen the final act of a very satisfying play. Eleanor stood frozen, shoulders stiff, eyes darting across the crowd. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off, her phone already pressed to her ear. I didn't follow. There was no emergency meeting that could fix this. The gate was mine now, and Eleanor had just been locked out of her own illusion. Eleanor didn't take her loss gracefully. If I thought the blinking red camera and HOA-funded gate were the height of her petty tyranny, I was sorely mistaken. Her defeat at the brunch should have been the end of it, the moment when a reasonable person would have cut their losses, offered a half-hearted apology, and slinked back into HOA obscurity. But Eleanor wasn't a reasonable person. She was a walking suburban soap opera with a grudge and a color-coded filing system. And the gate, now standing as a monument to her overreach and my small but mighty victory, became the spark that reignited her next phase of madness. It started with letters, not from her directly, of course. Eleanor liked to weaponize stationery. The first was a neatly folded envelope slipped into my mailbox, bearing the Willow Creek Shores HOA letterhead and a tone so sanctimonious it practically smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant. It accused me of undermining community morale, which I didn't realize was a chargeable offense, and claimed that my newly acquired parcel had historical significance as shared recreational space. According to the letter, I had an obligation, moral if not legal, to return access to the community. I laughed so hard I choked on my coffee. The next letter, a week later, was from their legal representative, citing some obscure clause about cooperative land usage buried deep in their charter. I replied with a scanned copy of my deed and a sticky note that read, "Cooperate this." Then came the boats. I noticed them one lazy Sunday morning while tending to my tomatoes, small paddle boats, a couple of kayaks, and a ridiculous inflatable swan drifting from the far end of the lake. At first, I thought it was just kids out having fun. But then I saw them docking at the far end of my property, tying off their little vessels, and stepping onto my land like it was a public park. One couple even set up a blanket and started unpacking a picnic basket. I walked down, calm but firm, and asked what they were doing. "Oh," the man said, startled. "We were told this area was part of the community lakefront. The HOA sent out a newsletter about the new boat landing zones." I nodded slowly. "Did the newsletter mention who owns this land you're standing on?" His wife blinked. "Wait, you own this?" I pointed to the sign bolted to the fence. I'd recently updated it with a county-issued parcel number and a new line. "Trespassing not permitted." After politely asking them to leave, I walked straight back to my porch and brewed the strongest coffee I could manage. Eleanor was escalating. If she couldn't own the land legally, she was going to try and reclaim it socially, turning public perception against me by treating my property like a communal backyard. The final straw came 2 days later when I looked out and saw a fresh row of bright orange buoys bobbing in the lake near my dock. They were strung together with netting, forming a crude aquatic fence. A sign attached to the center buoy read, "Community Swim Area. HOA members only." That was the moment I realized we had officially entered a new phase of warfare. Eleanor had shifted her invasion from land to water. I took a photo, emailed it to the county zoning office, and called a guy named Charles who worked in property enforcement. By the end of the week, the buoys were gone. County representatives came out, reviewed the maps, and declared the installation unauthorized. HOA members were informed that the lake, being navigable water, was not under HOA jurisdiction. That should have been a win, but all it did was make Eleanor more desperate. The next week, a teenage neighbor named Noah approached me like he was part of some underground resistance. He handed me a folder stuffed with printouts, glancing around like someone might be watching. "My mom's on the board," he whispered. "She left these on the kitchen counter." Inside were meeting minutes, internal memos, and notes from the last 3 HOA board sessions. The gold mine was buried in the margins. Olivia, the one board member who always seemed skeptical of Eleanor's antics, had objected multiple times to Eleanor's decisions, but Eleanor had bulldozed right over her. More alarming, there were references to a reclamation strategy, which included a proposal to vote my land into common HOA use by redesignating it as unclaimed greenway space. They were actually going to hold a vote, with no legal ownership, to declare my parcel as community property. That's when I decided to stop reacting and start pressing buttons. I called Charles again, and we dug deeper into the state zoning codes. Turns out, because the strip of land I bought was under a certain width and wasn't being used for any critical infrastructure, it qualified for something called a non-commercial preservation designation. With a bit of paperwork, I could apply to reclassify my property as a restricted ecological corridor, protected by law, off-limits to events, gatherings, or modifications of any kind. It took some legwork, but Charles helped me draft the forms, pull the environmental impact report, and submit everything officially. 2 weeks later, my land wasn't just private. It was protected. I received a shiny new sign from the county, designated Ecological Rest Zone. No unauthorized access. I mounted it right next to the gate, where Eleanor would have to squint at it every time she walked by. And walk by she did, almost daily now, mumbling into her phone, snapping pictures, pretending to inspect things. Her movements had become erratic, her smile thinner. She was unraveling. Then, one afternoon, I caught her in the act. I was watering my garden when I saw movement near the gate. Eleanor was crouched down, screwdriver in hand, trying to remove the hinges. I walked up behind her silently, waited until my shadow covered her back, and said, "Looking for something?" She froze like a raccoon caught in a spotlight, then slowly stood, brushing imaginary dust from her knees. "Oh, I was just inspecting some damage," she said, avoiding eye contact. "A resident mentioned the gate was unsafe." "Funny," I said. "The camera says no one touched it, but you." Her eyes snapped up. "You installed a camera?" "Legal on my property. Has a pretty decent microphone, too." She flinched. "You're being extremely uncooperative. You know, you're lucky I don't charge admission." Eleanor huffed, gathered her clipboard, and left with stiff, clipped steps. That was the last time she touched the gate. The final blow came not from me, but from Olivia. She showed up on my porch with a clipboard of her own and a tired smile. "I just thought you'd like to know," she said. "We're calling a full audit of HOA spending. Eleanor's about to be in a lot of trouble." Turns out, she'd allocated over $8,000 in HOA funds for fencing, signage, and so-called safety improvements, none of which had been properly documented or approved. That included a weekend spa retreat booked under her niece's name, labeled in the ledger as board stress recovery. Within days, Eleanor was suspended pending investigation. 2 days later, she resigned, blaming a toxic environment. I watched it all unfold from my fishing chair behind the gate. Occasionally, HOA residents would walk by, slower now, more sheepish. One man dropped off a six-pack and muttered, "Thanks for standing your ground." Another left a pie. Olivia brought cookies and a copy of the audit request with a sticky note that just said, "You win." But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like something better, the beginning of peace. And just like that, the war over a silly little gate became a story the neighborhood would tell for years. The neighborhood was quiet, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet you get after a thunderstorm, when everything feels heavy and charged, like the air itself is waiting for someone to do something stupid. Eleanor was gone from the board, suspended, disgraced, and practically exiled from her suburban throne, but her influence still lingered like the smell of burnt toast. The gate stood untouched, the new padlock gleaming in the sun, and the ecological rest zone sign was now a local conversation piece. People came by just to see it, whispering about the drama like tourists gawking at the ruins of some great battlefield. Some brought lemonade, others brought gossip. I brought a folding chair and enjoyed both. For a while, it seemed like that would be the end of it. Eleanor had lost her grip, and the rest of the HOA was too stunned or too embarrassed to make another move. Olivia, to her credit, tried to bring a little common sense back into the board meetings. She even sent out a new community bulletin that included phrases like respecting property lines and moving forward together, which was the suburban equivalent of waving a white flag. I didn't mind. Peace was peace, even if it came with a pamphlet. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Her presence returned in the worst way possible, through the internet. At first, I ignored it. A neighbor mentioned she'd seen something odd online, a video of a woman ranting in front of a green screen lake. I assumed it was just another HOA training clip or a local real estate pitch. But then someone sent me a link, and there she was, Eleanor Vance, backlit like a prophet, standing in front of a poorly photoshopped Willow Creek lake, declaring that a greedy land grabber had seized sacred community property and was holding the shoreline hostage. The video was a masterpiece of melodrama. She had dramatic music playing under her speech, ducks quacking in slow motion, and even footage of children playing by the lake overlaid with sad violin strings. She labeled me the gate goblin and claimed I had built a barricade of oppression, using zoning loopholes and deceit. In another video, she held up a blurry aerial image of my property, circled in red like it was a military target, and pointed to it as the site of unlawful exclusion. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't started picking up traction. A local blog picked up the story, then a regional one. A YouTuber known for exposing HOA scandals did a dramatic reading of her Facebook post, complete with animated reenactments and duck sound effects. Strangers began commenting on county property records, asking how much I charged to rent the land back to the community. One guy left a voicemail saying he was from Oregon and wanted to film a documentary. I asked if he'd ever been to Willow Creek Lake. He said no, but injustice is universal. At first, I was furious. I didn't ask for attention. I didn't want to be a meme or the subject of internet debates about property rights and environmental easements. I just wanted to fish in peace and not be harassed by someone with a clipboard and a superiority complex. But then something unexpected happened. The internet, as chaotic and unpredictable as it is, turned on Eleanor. Reddit threads dissected her videos, pointing out inconsistencies and highlighting her long track record of HOA complaints from past residences. Someone found a Yelp review she left for a local bakery that read like a manifesto. Another thread titled, "Karen tried to fence a lake and got wrecked by a fishing grandpa," went viral. Memes exploded. One of me sitting in my chair behind the gate, holding a lemonade, was captioned, "Gatekeeping done right." Another had me saying, "You shall not bass," with a wizard staff made from a fishing rod. I didn't know whether to be amused or concerned. A local news station caught wind of the story and wanted to do a segment. I politely declined, but they ran the piece anyway, pulling public records and interviewing neighbors off the record. The piece was surprisingly fair, and it ended with a dramatic shot of the gate, zooming in on the padlock like it was the final scene in a crime thriller. Olivia called me afterward, laughing so hard she could barely speak. Between gasps, she said, "You're Willow Creek's first viral legend." As funny as it all was, it had real consequences. The renewed attention triggered a closer look into Eleanor's time as HOA president. A few residents who'd been previously too intimidated to speak up came forward. They had stories, plenty of them: misuse of funds, fake citations, manipulation of votes. None of it amounted to criminal charges, but it was enough to get her blacklisted from ever holding a leadership position in any HOA affiliated with the regional council, not just in Willow Creek Shores, but in several communities across the state. Then, in what might be the single most satisfying twist of the entire saga, the county fined her. Turns out, some of her original permit applications had been forged, specifically the one she filed to install the fence on land she didn't own. She had signed as the authorized representative of property legally under someone else's name, mine. That fine was close to $10,000, plus additional legal fees. Her Facebook group went silent shortly after that. Her TikTok account was deleted. One final post on her page read, "Moving on to better waters." I assumed that meant she was moving again. Back in Willow Creek, things finally began to settle into something that resembled normal. Olivia and the new board began drafting a more transparent HOA charter, one focused on clarity, fairness, and avoiding gate-based scandals. She invited me to a meeting, not as a member, but as a consultant. I declined the title but agreed to swing by with donuts and sarcasm. It felt like the right balance. One warm spring morning, I walked down to the gate and decided to make a change. I removed the heavy-duty padlock and left the gate wide open. In its place, I installed a small wooden post with a new sign. Nothing fancy, just a simple message printed in waterproof ink. Access granted by courtesy. Respect earns welcome. Entitlement earns nothing. No legal threats. No zoning references. Just a test of character. And funny enough, it worked better than any lock ever did. People started asking politely. Teens who wanted to fish, older couples who liked to sit by the water. I kept a stack of laminated permission slips under the porch swing. If you asked and didn't act like you owned the place, you got one. It became a sort of local tradition. The kids called it earning the key, even though there wasn't one anymore. There didn't need to be. Then one afternoon, a teenage boy I'd never met knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Ethan, said his family had just moved in, and admitted that his friends dared him to sneak onto my dock, but he didn't. He knocked. He said, "My grandpa always said the right way is slower, but it doesn't burn bridges." I looked at him for a moment, then handed him a permission slip. "Welcome to the lake, Ethan," I said. "Just clean up your bait wrappers, and don't scare the fish." He grinned like I'd just given him a golden ticket. And for the first time in a long time, I sat back in my chair, looked out over the lake, and felt something close to what I'd originally come here for: peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that grows when people finally understand that respect, not rules, keeps the water calm. The lake had a way of remembering things. It didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't protest, but it held on to stories like ripples clinging to the shoreline. 1 year to the day after the gate first appeared, I stood on the dock with my thermos in one hand and my fishing rod in the other, staring out at the same water that had once been the battleground for the most ridiculous property war in the county's history. The gate still stood, though the paint had faded and the metal had taken on a charming bit of rust. I left it there on purpose, not as a warning, not even as a trophy, but because it had become part of the story. Sometimes symbols matter more than structures. The funny thing was, what started as a fence to lock me out had become a symbol of who could come in, if they asked. Olivia had organized something called Lake Appreciation Day, a low-key event meant to celebrate how far the community had come. There was a barbecue, some music, a raffle table manned by a retired couple who treated it like a Vegas casino, and even a thank you wall, where people wrote notes to each other for anything from sharing tools to forgiving noisy dogs. It was all very charming, and surprisingly, not a single clipboard in sight. I thought I'd get away with sneaking in unnoticed, maybe grab a burger and leave quietly. But then, through a megaphone that had no business being that loud, I heard Olivia call my name. I turned and saw a small crowd clapping. Kids were holding up hand-painted signs that said things like, "Thanks, gate guy," and "We love the dock." One had drawn a cartoon of me with a fishing hat, and, for reasons I'll never understand, laser beams shooting out of the gate behind me. I tried to wave them off, but Olivia marched over, grinning, and pulled me to the front. She handed me a plaque, real wood, carved with more care than I expected, that read, "In recognition of community integrity and unmatched patience." I half expected it to say most likely to cause petty chaos, but it was actually tasteful. A boy in the crowd asked if I was going to write a book about the whole thing. I said maybe. If I did, I'd call it Eleanor and the Fence That Couldn't. Everyone laughed. For a moment, I just stood there, surrounded by neighbors who were no longer strangers or passive HOA attendees. They were people now, people who smiled, cracked jokes, brought brownies, and remembered to say thank you. Somewhere between property disputes and fishing tips, we had become a community, a real one. Later that evening, just as the sun was melting into the horizon and the water shimmered with golden orange, Ethan showed up again, taller than I remembered, with his younger sister in tow. He asked if it was okay if she fished with him. I handed her a small rod I kept around for guests, showed her how to bait the hook without flinching, and told her to be patient. She caught her first bluegill within 10 minutes and screamed so loud I nearly fell off my chair. Ethan gave me a thumbs up, and for a brief, perfect moment, everything felt exactly right. And then came the twist. A silver sedan pulled up near the end of the road. It wasn't unusual for people to stop by now, curious about the story, the meme, the gate. But this car was different. A woman stepped out wearing sunglasses, a floral scarf, and flats that were far too white for dirt roads. She walked slowly, taking in the view, and the conversations around me dimmed to a hush. People turned, whispers rippled. I didn't have to hear her name to know it. Eleanor. She didn't approach anyone, didn't raise her voice or demand attention. She simply stood near the gate, staring at it like someone visiting the ruins of a bad decision. From her bag, she pulled out a small wooden box, opened it, looked inside, then closed it again without removing anything. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Part of me expected her to erupt, to make a scene or start filming, but she didn't. She turned, locked eyes with me across the field, and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. Still got the key? I raised my thermos slightly. Still don't need to use it. She gave the faintest nod, then turned and walked back to her car. No dramatics, no swan song, just a quiet exit stage left. Olivia came over and asked if I was okay. I shrugged. Honestly, it didn't bother me. People change, or they don't. Either way, it wasn't my job to make sense of it. My job was to watch the water, make sure the kids didn't hook each other, and keep the chairs from sinking into the mud. That night, a few of us stayed behind to roast marshmallows. Ethan reenacted the Great Gate War using stick figures and fire pokers. A retired couple handed me a homemade pie and thanked me for helping save the neighborhood from itself. I didn't feel like I did much. I just stood my ground when someone tried to move it. They disagreed loudly. Eventually, the crowd thinned out, and I was alone again, the lake whispering its quiet lullaby as the stars reappeared. I looked at the open gate, the signpost with the plaque, and the worn trail where hundreds of respectful feet had passed through. A year ago, I had been locked out. Now, people came in freely, not because they could, but because they knew how to ask. That shift, that change, felt bigger than any victory. It was something earned. Before heading inside, I opened the tackle box I kept by my chair and pulled out the original padlock Eleanor had installed. I kept it all this time, tucked under spare hooks and bobbers. It was rusted now, frozen shut from rain and neglect. I placed it gently on the post near the gate and left it there, a silent relic of a time when lines were drawn in metal instead of kindness. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. Just as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. Ethan again, jogging up slightly out of breath. "Hey," he said. "You coming to the late-night fish-off tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Cool." He nodded, then hesitated. "Also, someone put your fishing hat on the HOA bulletin board. Like, as a joke. Stapled it." I raised an eyebrow. "Was it you?" "Maybe," he said, grinning. "Community art, right?" I chuckled, shook my head, and waved him off. "Remind me to charge admission next time." The lake shimmered behind me, steady and unchanged. Everything else had moved on, but not the water. The water always stayed, quiet, patient, ready to hold the next story.